Boom! We're live. Hey, whoever's in the chat right now, can y'all hear us? Okay. Does it sound okay? This is our first time doing this thing. So.
You're a tech wizard. Hey, everybody.
Wizardry. Someone give us a thumbs up. I think let's see how this thing works. We got the mic. Sorry, you were blabbering on to go.
No, I was blabbering about the Good Vibe Guide. Said Nick Cegelski, how was the Shake Shack milkshake?
How do you feel?
We didn't go to Shake Shack, but I know tonight you're going to say, I had such a great work week. I deserve. Nick Frank said, can hear you now. And did you know that my middle name is Frank, Armand?
I did know. It's Nicholas F. Wow, Nick. Wow, he's literally got the same first and last as your middle. There it is. What's going on, folks? Here we are. I'm going to start this Q&A, and it's just going to be really flex right now. And it's going to be Ask Us Anything. And along the way, you can start to pop in some of your questions into the Q&A box. And as you pop your questions into the Q&A box, we will start to mark them as answered. And so common questions we've heard are things like, hey, help me with this sales thing, or how do you do this? But then there are also all these other behind the scenes questions that we typically don't answer together. So we are stocked up with 4 seltzers. He's already drinking one of them. And anything is fair game. If it's not fair game, we will tell you because we don't want to say something offensive. But most of the time, things about 30MVC, backstories on us, sales advice, anything is fair game. So start to pop your questions into the chat. The only last thing you may need is you may need to click subscribe in order to ask a question or drop in a comment, right? So if you haven't done that already, make sure that you click sub or something like that. All right, we're at 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Do you think we should just drop the Q&A and let's just do it in the chat?
Well, put in the chat if you've got a question. And I'm going to heat things up and start, Armand, by asking you a question, which is, what is your favorite thing about running 30 Minutes to President's Club?
Favorite thing about running 30 Minutes to President's Club? Of course, you put me on the spot with the first one.
You can ask me.
I would say, what's your favorite thing?
Oh, okay. We got a question. Jack says, what's the hardest part about building a media company? There we go.
You can't dodge your own question. I'll answer you. Okay, so my favorite question is the most exhausting thing about running 30 MPC is like you all hear the podcast go live, you see the YouTube videos go live, you see the webinars go live. It's all of the coordination nonsense that happens behind the scenes. Like it actually takes a really substantial amount of time to set up any like good form of content. Yeah. This is a good example is like we're on a monitor right now. There's a mic set up here. There's a light over there. We had to like move things around and we had to send out like a reminder email to get people to attend this. We have to post 3 times also that we can just like get over here and like do a Q&A. Right.
Like 2 minutes before this, we're about to go live, and you're like, "What button do I click to go live?" And we're like, "Uh-oh!" And so we're like scrambling, looking for it. And so I think some of it is just like you have to learn how LinkedIn works. You've got to learn how YouTube works. We have to learn how like Reddit works. So anytime we're doing something, you got to be like, "What button do I click?"
Exactly. It's a huge pain, and neither of us are particularly technically capable individuals. However, what I will say is number one, like when we're live on the content. Like if we could just show up and the content is all we had to think about, life would be amazing. Yep. Is all we do is just like interview amazing guests and create awesome videos. And then number 2, my favorite part is actually even more than the content creation is like inorganically when we go on hikes and stuff like that, when we go out and on our walks, some of the best ideas and the concepts, whether that's like a leadership podcast or a new concept for Tactic TV, the inorganic content creation process is my personal favorite. So now that you've had my airtime, what do you think?
Oh, I'm supposed to be thinking my answer there.
You're supposed to be thinking your answer.
My favorite part about 30 Minutes to President's Club is our job is literally to ask extremely smart people questions that I want to ask them. This work feels effortless when we bring on like an elite seller who like frankly is a lot better at sales than you and I are. And I can just be like, for those of you who don't know, like I handle all of our advertising sponsorship sales for 30 Minutes to President's Club. And so I'm out there selling every day and it's not easy, especially in the economy right now. Like I'm getting punched in the face left and right. And so we'll bring on a really, really great seller and I can basically say, this is a thing I'm struggling with. What would you do? And so one of the nice things people say to us sometimes is like, oh, wow, like we love your interviewing style. It's just me asking questions to people who are really smart. So that's my favorite thing.
Okay. I'll give you another one.
Okay, let's hear
Or wait, why don't you answer Jack's question, then I got another one for you.
So Jack said, what is the hardest part about building a media company? For me, I think it is the spectrum between the tension between quality and quantity. And I think there's a lot of pressure from the audience and from sponsors and frankly from ourselves to be like, we should do more. We should do different channels. We should just pump out more and more and more content. And the promise that we've tried to have to the folks who consume 30 Minutes to President's Club content, whether it's the podcast or the webinars or the assets that we do, is it's got to be the best of the best of the best. And so sometimes I feel like there's tension between wanting to do more, but not letting the quality drop. And so I feel like you and I always have these debates where we're like, always like, here's a shiny object. We should do this. And then we realize it's just not going to be as good as what I think we want it to be.
That's right. Okay. So guys, chat too quiet. Like ask them, because I got a million questions for Nick, but ask something that you want to know that you're too afraid to ask right now. Oh, there we go. Do you actually like sales? Ooh,
that's a good one.
I don't. Nick knows this. So the way that we divvy up duties is he runs all sales and I run all content and product. So if you actually like, oh, hey Jesse, what's up? If you look at my LinkedIn, I've actually never been an IC account executive for more than 9 months. Sort of wild. And I made VP of sales off of that. And the reason for that is like the moment I figured out how to close deals, it got really freaking boring for me. Like my mind goes insane with like repetitive tasks. But then there are some AEs who just like love that thrill of the hunt or the closing of the big deal. I enjoy helping other people get to that because they find joy in that. But I think you might be a little bit different.
I mean, there are elements of sales that I don't enjoy, right? Like it's brutal when I'm like prepped and amped for a really great sales conversation and then the customer doesn't show up or they reschedule last minute or like, I don't know. I think a lot of you probably have dealt with difficult prospects. Like that is frustrating. But I really love the psychology side of sales. And I think that's what does it for me. Like if you think about like all human communication, and then there's this subset of like sales communication, you know me, like I'm interested in all of the psychological, I don't want to say the word tricks because you're not intending to trick your prospect, but all the, like the psychological tools and the ways that you can communicate and draw stuff out from the other people. I love that stuff. I don't like the, stigma that being in sales has where people are like, you go to a party and you tell somebody you work in sales and they're like, oh yeah, I don't want to buy your thing. I'm like, I'm not here to sell. Like we're at a party, dude. So there's pieces I like, there's pieces I don't like.
So on that note, what's the single, you talked about like the psychological aspect of sales, but it's also done for other parts of your life. What is your favorite tactic that you've learned on 30 MPC that you use in real life?
Easy. Humbling disclaimer. So we learned this from Charles Mulbauer. And the idea behind the humbling disclaimer is it can sometimes be tough to like really be direct with your prospect. Like when you're asking about stuff like budget and timeline and an intro to their boss and frankly being like, are you going to buy this thing or not? And most salespeople go one of two ways when it comes time to ask the hard questions. They either ask it, but it's like almost too direct where it's like, so Armand, are you going to buy this thing? And the prospect is like, whoa. Or this is what I did for the longest time. I would shy away from those hard questions because I didn't want to like hit them in the face with like, so are you buying this month or not? And the idea behind the humbling disclaimer is you take all of the anxiety or concern or worry, all the stuff that's like real inside, and you just preface your ask with that. And so you can be like, I feel kind of awkward about asking this, and I don't want to come across as like being super salesy, but I'm curious about the timeline for like when you're looking to come aboard. Yeah. Like, what do you think? And when you ask it that way, it's real. And I think you hear, be a human when you sell. And that's a way to be human is like the best salespeople don't have a lot of bravado and charisma. Like they have a real conversation, and that allows me to do that. It allows me to do the things that I need to do as a salesperson without having to be this like super slick, so do you want the red car or the blue car, Armand?
That's right. And so, what was it? There was one time, there was one story that you used a humbling disclaimer. Really funny.
And when we used it, when you and I bought some rental property.
That's what it was.
You were the one that did it.
Tell that one.
Okay. I'm going to tell the story. Great. So, One other thing you all might not know is Armand and I own some rental property together. We actually were investing in real estate for a long time before we started 30 Minutes to President's Club. And there was one point in time when we were buying a 4-unit apartment building, and a fourplex is what it's called. And we wanted to get a lower price. And I remember you called the agent, and we had just done this episode with Charles, and you were like, you're going to think I'm a cheapo. You're going to hate me. I feel just almost embarrassed to like ask for a lower price because you've been so good to us. And I don't know, I think you ended up saving like $100,000 in total on the purchase price. So that one episode saved us a lot of money.
Yeah, I tend to be like a really hardline negotiator, and I've been trying to work on this because I would always just like whack people over the head and be like, I'm going to go to your competitors and I'm going to ask for like a quarter of the price. And it sort of like gets exhausting. And we have something like 20 vendors that it takes to put together 30 MPC. We have copywriters, we have podcast editors, we have webinar production agencies, we have this, and that. And it started to get really exhausting just going into these like super hardline negotiations because it's not like we're this $800 million business and we have to be like lean and efficient. And so I found the most pleasant way to handle a negotiation is just calling out, hey, this is a really uncomfortable conversation for me to have, right? Or even calling out the fact like, hey, I'm probably going to ruin your day with this ask. And then almost bringing them with a less intense humbling disclaimer or a less intense ask than the initial humbling disclaimer. That tends to almost be like, oh, that's not that bad for them.
Right.
When you call it out at the beginning.
You did this to me also. We were actually having a conversation about the business, and I had an opinion on something, and you like disagreed with that opinion. And you literally, before you said the opinion, you literally said to me, what I'm about to say to you, I'm worried is going to be really, really triggering for you. Yeah. And I immediately, the first feeling was like, uh-oh. And I was like, wait, he means well. And then you said it, and I was like, no, it wasn't, dude. And so I immediately leaned into your
down here.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Okay, so there. By the way, folks, we ended like the Q&A box because it's just like the feature sort of janky, and there are like enough people just blowing up the chat. So if you like a question that you saw in the chat, why don't we just like make it a team rule here, where like just say +1 in the username for their question. So there's some other really good questions in here. It looks like we've got a sales question from Jack.
Okay.
Why don't we like answer a sales question, then we'll go back to some 30 MPC behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
How would you respond to a prospect who says on a cold call, especially in SaaS, they already have everything your platform does covered since they built it in-house?
Oh, they built it in-house. They got a whole software design agency.
Ooh.
Okay, so we should talk through the Mr. Miyagi method here, because that's really how you respond to any tough objection that you get on a cold call. The number one thing that you should not do in your response, Jack, is try to fight or overcome that objection immediately. So you shouldn't say things like, oh, well, here's the 3 differences that we have to like what you guys are doing today. Or, well, we actually had someone who recently switched from something they did in-house. Anything that disagrees with the prospect and their perspective right away, you're going to get hung up on, you're going to piss them off, and they're not going to be open. And so step 1 is you want to disarm them by agreeing with what they said, where it's like totally fair. Like, you know, when folks can build this stuff in-house, oftentimes like that's a cheaper and faster way to get things done. Doesn't matter what you say, but agree with them, because they're expecting you to disagree and try to fight. And they're like, whoa, okay, wait a minute. What do I do from there? So I disarm them. I agree. I'm going to keep going.
Whole riff. I'm not going to interrupt you mid-methodology.
I don't know. I thought we were going to go back and forth.
No, I'm not going to like do the back and forth.
Okay.
What do you got? So you agreed with the objection.
So we've agreed with the objection. The next thing that we want to do is we want to pull out some more information from them. So I'm looking at the question. How would you respond to a prospect who says on a cold call, especially in SaaS, they already have everything your platform does covered since they built it in-house?
I can help you out.
Help me out here.
All right. So step number 1, agree with the objection, right? Totally understand. I should have assumed that you got this thing taken care of. Step number 2, I need to incentivize them to share more information, right? So for example, let's use 30 MPC and make this really, really tactical. If we're trying to sell them like a podcast sponsorship or a webinar sponsorship or a newsletter sponsorship, and they're doing all this stuff in-house, right? I might say something like this. Hey, just so I make sure no one calls you again, is it because you all are like, you have a whole social media arm built out and in-house, you have all your content creation done yourself, or you've like put together a series of other creators to make sure that all of your market awareness, yada, yada, sponsorship needs are taken care of? Is it like truly in-house, or have you already just like cobbled together the different types of vendors out there, right? And what I want to do is I want them to pile on to the objection a little bit more. And the way that I've incentivized them to do that is by saying, hey, just so no one else calls you again, right? Could you give me a sense of like what you actually have going on, right? From there, they're going to give me one of two things. They're either going to give me answer A, B, or perhaps C, none of the above, right? And then I'm going to handle that objection. The way that I'm going to handle that objection is, let's say they're doing this stuff with like a bunch of agencies in-house, right? Or they've like built out this media arm, right? I'm not going to try to sell them the product right now. I'm going to throw one dart while telling them you're not going to buy this thing. And I'm going to sell them on the meeting, not on the product. So if someone's doing this in-house, I might say something like this. Hey, Nick, my guess is like you're probably not going to sponsor 30 MPC, right? Every once in a while, I took a look at your content. Like, you've got such good social. You've got really, really good reach. But hey, like every once in a while when someone has like an in-house content machine, they want to like supercharge it with 30 MPC. And it's not like this thing where we're getting married for the next 12 years, but sometimes it can just like accelerate all the things that you're doing now. So look, my guess is still you're not going to work with us, but would you be completely against taking a look at us for 30 minutes just so you know what's out there? And frankly, if nothing else, you might be able to steal a couple things that you can use for your own business, right? Mm-hmm. And so what are they getting out of the meeting, right? They're going to get, one, the knowledge of what it might look like to supercharge our business off of supercharge their already existing efforts. But then two, they're also going to potentially get some things that they can steal from us, even if they don't sponsor us, that will funnel into their content strategy. So try to figure out what they are going to get out of the meeting, even if they don't buy your product.
There's two things that I want to add. That what you just described, Armand, is a really effective way once they've hit you with that objection. In my opinion, the best way to handle that objection is to say things that don't allow it to come up in the first place. And so when you tell people that you're a accounting and billing platform or an HR compensation tool, when you describe or label what it is you do, you make it really easy for the prospect to say, well, we already have that, right? Well, we're a data analytics platform that helps people X, right? We're a compensation tool that helps people Y. Well, we already have a data analytics platform. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we have that covered in-house. So anytime that you categorize your solution when you're giving a pitch, you are opening yourself up to that response, Jack, where they say, well, we already have that covered. And so the fundamental thing that you need to do is actually preempt that objection by not talking about what you do. Instead, you should be pitching the problem that you solve, right? So if I'm pitching 30 MPC or I'm pitching a data analytics platform, I'm not talking about, oh, we are X. We help with X. That opens you up to that objection. Instead, your pitch is, oftentimes when I talk to CFOs, they get really, really frustrated because they don't have a good way to understand the totality of the outstanding AR that they have across a client base from 6 different businesses. I'm calling you about something that might be able to help with that. No one's going to say, oh, we already built a platform to do all that in-house. I'm going right to the problem, not talking about the value, right? I'm not giving a value prop. I'm giving a problem prop.
Boom. Hope that helps you, Jack. On that note, we have 2 Jacks in the chat, actually. There are 2 questions that I saw that I think could be interesting. Yeah. Folks in the audience, tell us which one you prefer that we answer. So the first one is from Jack also, which is, what got you to start 30 MPC in the first place? All right, that's question number 1. Question number 2 is, I've seen a lot of creators on LinkedIn talk about being relevant and doing research on your accounts to make them personalized. How do you know what to look for when doing research and if it is relevant enough? That's from Cloud Mammal. So question number 1, why'd you start 30 MPC? Question number 2 is, how do you come up with relevant research? Which of the 2 would you all prefer that we answer?
Give us a 1 or 2. Give us a 1 or a 2 in the chat. Let us know which direction you want us to go.
2. There's 2.
Manuel said 2.
Manuel's going to go for research. Oh,
Jack wants the other answer. He forfeits his question. All right, automatically the question's forfeited.
All right, so we'll go with question 2, which is, I've seen a lot of creators on LinkedIn talking about being relevant and doing research on your accounts to make them personalized.
Yeah.
How do you know what to look for when doing research and if it's relevant?
I can take the beginning of this one. So, step 1 is you need to know what you're looking for. So the way to make this take forever and spend 47 minutes researching one prospect is to just say, all right, well, I've got Armand at this account. Let me go do some research and hope I can connect some things. Instead, take 45 minutes and sit down with a piece of paper and a notebook and just think about, when you are looking for a prospect, what are some of the things that make it really, really easy for you to say, am I slapping it? I'm sorry.
Please.
I apologize, everybody. I apologize, Armand. What are the things that are triggers for making me say, oh, this is a reason to reach out to this prospect? It might be they're hiring people. It might be that they just raised a round of funding. It might just be that they opened a new office, or they released a new piece of content on their website. That's one of the things that I'll look for with our advertising. And so what you need to do is sit down and think about, okay, what are the triggers that would make it really easy for me to say this is a good prospect? And then you're going to work backwards and you'll just look those things up. So you have to actually flip the way that you are doing it. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
So in episode 1, which is still, in my opinion, one of the best episodes of all time, Joe Caprio talked about a concept called first is best.
Yes.
And what that means is, look, when you're researching an account, most of the time, there are 5 things that if you see them, like, that's a good buying trigger. Stack rank those 5 things and look for those things in order.
Yes.
And the moment you find the first one, stop looking. First is best. So find those triggers, stack rank them in order, and write the email with that. I find that preparing for a discovery call, right, you might want to have 2, 3, or 4 of those things, because you might need 2, 3, or 4 points of view on types of problems that they're going to have. But you usually only need like 1 point of tailoring or proof point when you're doing a cold call or when you're doing some form of email outreach. Very rarely are you tailoring 7 emails, and you really shouldn't try to tailor 7 things into a single email either.
Yeah. Yes. So. And so when you're doing that, then what you might do is you might create templates for each of those triggers. So they're hiring. You might create a template for when they are hiring and how you might incorporate that. And so you're not writing all of that from scratch, and that should make it faster for you.
Bingo.
Okay, what do you want to get to next? So we see with AI creeping into all fields, how would you see AI changing sales? Why don't I take that one?
Okay. Is that an implicit pass to me?
No, I can take it. My take on this right now is, when we interview salespeople from great companies on our podcast, we don't tell them, hey, you need to take the interview in this direction or that direction. We just tell them to share what's working for them in sales today. And I think out of like the last 40 episodes, Armand, we've had one person talk about like using AI in sales. And so I don't see a lot of folks using it right now. I see a lot of stuff about like call summaries and like automated stuff. And a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing right now, like I wouldn't send to a prospect. And so I don't know. I feel like it's super early right now, and I don't see a ton of use cases that make me say, oh, I want to do this immediately. There's some research stuff that I could talk about, but you might have something else you want to add.
Yeah. So I have a decent like number of friends who are like trying to start companies in the AI enabled sales space. And a lot of them, I think, are solving the wrong problem. So for example, I think a lot of people are like AI enabled deal coaching, right? And all of this stuff where it's like trying to ingest a conversation and be like, oh, I'm going to replace a sales manager, it's like it's 17 steps ahead of where the game is today. And I'm not saying that that's where it's gonna be there forever, but the people who are trying to go that far, they're missing like 4 steps in between. And the market isn't ready for like that level of innovation. And frankly, the technology is not ready for that level of innovation. Is if you look at like these AI enabled coaching solutions, oftentimes like the coaching, like advice that it's giving is pretty garbage. And a sales manager, like any sales manager worth their salt, will not take it. Yeah. I'll tell you two things that are interesting to me though. The first is the number one place no, it's not a jab at Gong, by the way, because Gong helps with a lot of other things related to that. The first thing that I think is really helpful in this regard is, again, I talked about how that's like too many steps removed. Mm-hmm. Gong is working on things like this, and other companies are working on things like this where they can bring you one step closer to the action. So let's say you're a VP of sales and you need to be across 300 deals, and you need to know if power is involved in 300 deals, or you need to know if these types of things were discussed in 300 deals. Where I see some of these solutions going, which in my mind is far more valuable, is you take the work out of sifting through 300 deals from me as a VP of sales, right? So you can tell me if 300 deals have power involved, or if I'm a specific methodology, you can tell me that these 300 deals of these 300 deals, 100 of them have like followed the appropriate talk tracks or something like that. They essentially have a heat-seeking missile for me as a sales leader to focus in the right areas. That's the first place. The second place that I actually think is much, much more valuable, and ChatGPT does like a little bit of this, but there's going to need to be like a dedicated solution for this, is everyone who's been an SDR before knows that when you become a really good SDR, it becomes an if this, then that job. If I see this research, then that template. If I see that research, then that template. But the research process and the if this, then that is nightmarishly a manual process. So if you can have a tool that can basically just scrape the web of your top 10 triggers, right? And be like, based on your top 10 triggers, these are the 5 that I found for any given prospect. Click that, and 3 trigger templates are right in front of you. That will make it such that the SDR job is not focused on scraping the web anymore. They're focused on selecting the most relevant piece of research. And then, of course, there are a bunch of email tools that'll help you actually write the email. But that's my take, is I think like the whole like prospecting process before you sell is an epidemic, and the SDR job is like 90% manual work.
We had an episode of the podcast with Sonny Round, and he talked about when he's doing like enterprise prospecting, he'll plug in a 10K and he'll tell it to, hey, look for these 4 things. Yeah. And that will make that, he's not having to read it word for word. He's able to pull out this key stuff that he's looking for. So that's a use case that I thought was helpful. I'm going to do this one quick. A manual gauge. For existing accounts, how would you go about expanding / upselling when they've had a poor experience recently? Step 1, I'd call them. And I wouldn't let that be an excuse for not solving other problems that they have. Like, okay, if my software isn't working, I'm probably not going to buy more licenses. So it's going to be hard to do that upsell, a manual. But if they have another problem, like if you have another product that you sell that could help them, like, so one, I would call them and I would own the fact that things aren't going well right now. And I would just try to like seek first to understand before you try to be understood. Hey, like I saw you put in some support tickets recently, or I know we talked last week and like things have been kind of frustrating. Like I know we've been working to fix this stuff. Like, how are you feeling? Right? So let them dump on you. Sometimes folks just want to be listened to. And so let them share, and then do some stuff to help fix those problems. If you need to connect them with a support person, if you just need to like be there so they can dump on you and vent, great. And when that happens, you'll build actually a lot of trust, whether you're helping fix the problem or just listening to them. And that can be the next step to open up a conversation around, hey, let's talk about expanding or upselling. But they shouldn't happen at the same time. Like, you shouldn't be doing account manager, customer service stuff and saying, oh, and by the way, I've got a contract for you to upsell. Like, listen, make an effort to help fix it, and then you can have the upsell conversation.
Boom.
You got more you want to add, or you want to go to
Jack's? All of our customers.
So. Oh, I do.
Since the chat's moved, do you watch videos where other content creators on LinkedIn tag and mention y'all? Oh, you tagged us in. See, I was on a hike an hour ago. And thank you, Jack, for blowing up the chat. By the way, everyone, if you just joined us, I see the numbers going up and down, which leads me to believe that there's some rotation here. Throw your questions in the chat. All things, both sales and also behind the scenes, anything you want is totally fair game. You can ask about Nick's weird eating habits, but I'll leave for that one. Do you watch videos where other content creators on LinkedIn tag/mention you? There's a question. Two parts of the question. Do I watch or do I enjoy? So we'll bucket them into two categories. Do they catch my attention? Yes. Do I always enjoy the attention that it catches? No. So here are the types that I don't like. Jack, I haven't even looked at your thing. I'll look at it in a second. I don't like it when people do what I call tag bombing, which is they put out a post and they're like, here are 20 creators. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I'm like, you're clearly just like trying to get some engagement and you're hoping that Josh Braun replies, right? Or something like that. Those ones piss me off a lot. A lot of times people will be like, the cheap way to do it is like, who are the top 15 creators on LinkedIn? Here are 15 people that I'm following. Who am I missing? Right? And then you get all these creators commenting and they're like, me, you're missing me. And I'm like, this is just like
lame.
It's totally lame. It's just like a grab for attention. What I do like is when people say, hey, here's a tactic that I learned from 30 NPC. Here's how I implemented it here or made it my own. And here were the results. Yeah. I always love seeing those. And I always comment on those whenever I see them. There's a difference between tagging us to try to get attention versus tagging us and showing us like, hey, this is like something that you guys taught me and here's my version of it, right? Thank you guys. I'm paying it forward, right? To everyone else who wants to see this kind of thing, right? And it sounds like Jackie did something like that. But Nick, anything I missed?
No, I mean, I think that's my main thing with LinkedIn where like, I just feel like right now it's a lot of people screaming for attention. Like I look at my feed and it's like, look at me, look at me, look at me. And I think the people that, end up being successful on LinkedIn are on the folks who give versus look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And that's like the thing that you and I have committed to each other on LinkedIn is like, I won't make a post if there is not something that a salesperson can do, say, or write that very day in it. I only want to give value to the audience. Like I want to share stuff that is actually going to help people that follow me, not plug, promote, like get eyeballs on me. And so I think it's hard, especially when you're starting out. But like, dude, when we started 30 NPC, it was just like every day we were like trying to share a different tip on LinkedIn of something that helped us in our sales job. And that stuff accrues over time. And that's how you build like a real audience, as opposed to like the weird farming stuff and joining a bunch of pods where you comment on each other's crap. Like to me, that's garbage. And the best quote that I think that encapsulates that is, there is a difference between attention and reputation. And you want to cultivate a positive reputation, not necessarily have a bunch of attention on you.
Bang. I have a question for the audience. Mm-hmm. What's one form of content we've created that we should stop creating?
Anything involving Armand.
Just leave right now.
I was worried you were going to get mad when I was punching in front of the Blue Yeti and you were just going to leave the
clapping in front of the mic.
I'm enthusiastic about selling.
See, what's funny is when y'all hear the podcast,
we edit this crap.
We edit it a lot, and we also edit the sound volumes. But even though we edit the sound volume, there's sometimes where Nick is like screaming into his mic, and I'm like, dude, shut up, stop screaming. And that's the stuff that y'all don't see behind the scenes. But anywho, while folks marinate on that, tips to create the best subject line for cold emails. Tips to create. Okay, so let's start rattling off. What are some of the golden rules for subject lines? Folks, if you know them, put them in the chat. By the way, if you can't comment, you just got to click the sub button. You can also unsub afterwards if you'd like. But you click the sub button, you can comment in the chat. So how to create the best subject line for cold emails.
Let's go back and forth. You give a do or don't. I'll give a golden rule. I'll give a golden rule.
I'm going to steal your 3 to 4 words.
Okay. I was going to say no punctuation. Like you're not screaming leads for you. And if you have a question mark, it's like, it's obvious that it's a sales email.
Okay. No selling in the subject line.
Ooh, don't make your subject line all caps. You don't need to scream at them.
He's just coming up with all these. He's like, don't use like exclamation.
No,
marks.
It's
don't
true.
Use emojis.
It's true.
Don't put a dog in the subject line.
Oh, that was going to be my next one. I would say it's got to be something that is about them, right? If it can be mail merged, probably not a good subject line.
There you go. The last one that I'll give you is it should be something that piques the interest. And so you don't want to sell on the subject line. So what that means is, let's say I know that Nick is a UFC wrestler, right? I might make the subject line wrestling. He's going to open it, right? But then the second key is you need to tailor that subject line or segue that subject line into a problem you solve.
Yeah.
So that actually comes from one of the best cold emails I've ever received. A guy named James, and the subject line was wrestling. And then he transitioned that to what it's like to be wrestling your reps every day, asking them to cold call more or asking them to prospect. And I was like, that's good. And you obviously had a prospecting tool. Yeah. So always like subject line, pique the interest, first paragraph, explain what you saw, then segue into the problem you solve.
Yes. So I want to connect that what you just explained is a question that we had earlier, which was around like personalization and what to look for. And that person probably had a really good framework where, okay, wrestling is a really good one. Be like, you feel like you're wrestling your reps, but like there's also like other sports. Like if you're playing tennis, like, you know, there's other sport. Like I bet you can do this sport email framework where it's like, if you found that the person played a sport, that can be the subject line. And it can be like, you know, if you're a football player, right? You played football in college. Does it ever feel like the work you have to do getting your reps to pick up the phone and cold call is as brutal as getting tackled in a big game? Like, I don't know, that was sort of cheesy, but like you can come up with a way to say, oh, this trigger, connect to this template.
Bang. There are two fun ones that I want to answer.
Okay.
Super Pal made me laugh. When's the Nick? And then we're going to come back to Jack's. I didn't miss the question on Vidyards, Nick, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm not big on thumbnails for Vidyards. Like, I don't know, have a ton of tactics around that. I don't know if
well, let's just answer. Do you have any advice for thumbnails for Vidyards?
We'll come back to it.
Okay, you want to come back to it.
Answer these other ones. The wins the Nick Cegelski versus Armand onesie 3-round wrestling. So Nick and I have wrestled multiple times. We were actually college wrestling drilling partners. And so we wrestled every single day. We also had multiple matches together. Nick was the more successful wrestler, believe it or not.
But not against you.
Not against me. So we wrestled in competition.
We were one weight class apart. So I wrestled at 149. Armand was 157.
I was 157. We did have 2 live matches together that were scored.
And he won them both.
I did win both of them.
He won them both.
However, in competitions, Nick does number one, he does a really good job of like breaking opponents. Even though I look like the more like meatheady, muscly guy, Nick's cardio is just like insane. It's like absurd. So he would like get into the third period and like he might be down, but he's coming in hot. And I remember there was one guy that he was down on like 10 points and he scored. It was something like ridiculous, like 7 takedowns in 2 minutes against the guy. So that's just like how he outworked and broke people. And like you can see some of that translate to like the energy drinks with Nick stuff that he writes on the newsletter. It's a lot about just like outworking people, and that's like totally a mindset thing.
Yeah.
So when is the match? It's already happened. That's a great question. What's your criteria for choosing quality guests for podcasts and webinars? By the way, wrestling stuff, 30 MPC behind the scenes, like business stuff, also just like any of the businesses we started in college, totally fair game. Lots of funny stories there.
Yes.
What's your criteria for choosing quality guests for your podcasts and webinars?
We've given up bringing on like B-tier sales influencers.
Yeah.
You know, that was the thing that you and I, like in the early days, we would like bring on anybody that like had that attention on LinkedIn. And one of the most frustrating things for us is when we interview a guest who's like, they talk a big talk on LinkedIn and then you start to ask them questions and they like can't actually answer those questions. And we made a decision probably 7-8 months ago. We were like, we're only bringing on like the number one rep at we made a list of like, I don't know, 400 like really elite companies that we really respect. And we're like, we're only going to bring on the number one rep from those companies because I don't want to hear the same garbage rehashed from folks that like haven't actually sold. I want to talk to folks that are doing the job right now at really great companies. And so it frustrates folks sometimes because like there's folks I have a relationship with on LinkedIn and they'll ask me to come on the show and they'll send me like really good, like they'll almost prospect me or try to build a relationship. And I'm like, that's not what our show's about anymore. It's not what our show's about anymore. It's really easy to bring on a C-tier sales influencer to a webinar. It's a lot harder. Like we have to prospect our guests still.
Yeah. So we get our guests in a couple different routes. And the other thing that's worth noting is we cut 1 in 4 episodes and it's like really uncomfortable. And I don't know, I think we shared it like in our first trailer ever, but 1 in 4 episodes don't make the cut. And it's like pretty uncomfortable. We don't like that. We try to suss it out in our screening process, but our promise to the audience is to be the most tactical sales podcast in the world. And there are a lot of Michael Jordans in sales who cannot explain what they're doing. Like you'll ask them things like, okay, so how do you open up a discovery call? And they'll say things like, you ask hard questions, right? Ask impact questions. And you ask them what types of questions. They're like, you got to listen, right? And it's like, I can't. And I'm like, come on, like break it down a little bit. So we do cut a decent number of folks. The 2 ways that we source guests for the most part are, number 1, through referrals. And so we try to find like blue chip guests. And the hardest part is finding the first couple blue chip guests. But for example, like I'll ask someone like Kyle Coleman, who is not a sales influencer, but he has an extremely massive following, but he's at an amazing tech company, right? And I'll be like, Kyle, who are the unknown President's Club members that you've sold with in the past? And he'll have 3 people who've never posted on LinkedIn. And last week was a great example. We had a guy named Chris Surdy, who's like an elite enterprise seller. And we got to him through Stephen Gergi, who's also a world-class, like, first rep at Segment, right? And basically closed more revenue for them than anyone else. And I got to him through our VP of product at Pave, right? Neither of those guys post on LinkedIn at all. 2 of the best episodes of all time through like 2nd and 3rd degree connections. That's all I have on that. There's some other sales questions in there. Which one do
you have any suggestion on influencing marketing departments that don't align with sales on getting them MQLs?
You're probably better for this. You work with all the sponsors. I just
do you have suggestion? Jason, can you tell me some more about that question? I don't totally understand your situation. Can you give me some more detail on that?
Don't align with sales.
Tell me some more about the problem that you're dealing with.
While we hear more on the problem.
Don't get any demand gen from marketing. Okay. Do you have any suggestions? So what's happening is like there are MQLs, or there's people that are downloading your content. Or content on your website, or joining like webinars of you guys, but you're not getting any leads, right? People who want to buy your thing. Is that right, Jason? Oh, my heart's pounding. He said correct. Okay. Correct. This might be harsh, but you can't control your marketing department. Like if you're an IC at a sales organization, like I guess you can go complain to your boss and go make a business case. But there's one of 2 directions that I would recommend going. One is embrace the mentality of if it's to be, it's up to me. If you're going to hit your quota, if you're going to make a lot of money, if you're going to do really well, like ultimately the responsibility is yours. And maybe there's a report that you can run in HubSpot or Salesforce. Maybe there's some like digging you can do. Maybe you can start asking customers you've sold for referrals. Maybe you just need to make more cold calls. But ultimately, like your success is up to you. And you might want to start talking to other reps at the company that are doing well and hitting their target and figuring out what's working for them. But I think it's really, really easy. And this is not meant to be a criticism of you. It's really easy to say like, marketing's not giving me enough demand gen. Most of the places I've worked, like I don't get inbound leads. I rarely get demo requests. And so I think you've got to embrace it. Like if you're going to succeed, it's going to be because of you. The other route you might go is like you're at a sinking ship and you need to go somewhere else. And that's a reality that I've been in before also. So that's my take on it. You got anything you want to add?
It's tricky because where are you going to get the best bang for your buck, right? You could try to like go and meet with your marketing team. You could try to help them create content. You could try, like I knew a lot of folks at Carta where we didn't have any content. Carta like has some of the best equity education now. And there was a sales rep who like every single week he would just like be the author of like a new blog and he would write it on the weekend. And like he got a lot of business because of that, because he was like the first person who was like writing, this is how a stock option works. His stuff is still up. Like you can see his name next to the Equity 101 article, right? And you could do that if your marketing team is open to it, but sometimes they won't be open to it. I don't recommend like salespeople try to turn themselves into marketers. There's a lot of like nonsense around social selling. It's funny because that's a very LinkedIn influencer-y thing to talk about. I think social selling is like total garbage.
Waste
and
of
like
time.
Someone can come and fight me on it, but like all of this effort around like posting your own content, for like a plumbing SaaS solution is like a colossal waste of time, with the exception of if you are in a space that is extremely active on LinkedIn,
Yes.
and you might be selling to sales leaders, for example. And in that case, it might make sense. But if you think you're going to make President's Club off building your own content machine, it's like, I've never seen it happen. I've seen a lot of people like not make President's Club off of focusing on the right things. So I would like try to see if you can help the marketing team with some like low hanging fruit stuff. See if you can be part of the solution, time box it. And if not, one, just like try to focus on other warm referral routes like yourself, in addition to your outbound efforts, or go find another company. That's my take.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
What else? Any funny stories?
Any funny stories?
Let's see.
We're looking for more questions. Give us more questions. You bring the questions, we'll bring the answers, folks.
Jack said, what's the hardest thing about building a media company? Someone said, what got you to start 30 MPC in the first place?
We didn't answer that one.
Which one?
Why we started 30 MPC in the first place?
Yeah. Okay.
You want to tell a story? You want me to tell a
I
story?
can tell the story.
Okay.
I can tell the story.
Kick it off.
Yeah, because you rejected me for the longest time. Okay. So Nick and I have like a long history of like doing things together and nearly killing each other. That has still continued. And so
yes.
So you guys can tell who's the crankier co-host. It's me. I actually have questions for the audience around like the co-host dynamic, and if it's like annoying. While I'm answering this, is it annoying that we do like all the back and forth on the podcast, or does that make it part of the experience? Because sometimes we're like really cheap stand-up comedians on the podcast, and then other times we're like, all right, just shut up and talk about the content. But anywho, I will shut up and talk about the content. So, backstory: we met at USC. We were college wrestling teammates. We started that team together. We were captains together. And then we went through a variety of business ventures together. It started with broke college kid business ventures. So we sold margaritas, we flipped bikes. There are funny stories behind all of those.
Mm-hmm.
We sold flour lays at graduation.
Yes.
Painful. First one we've ever lost money on. And then we started a vending machine company.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that company burnt down, that was a real startup where we raised capital and everything. We actually stopped doing business together for like a year or two. He moved to the East Coast. I stayed on the West Coast. And then eventually we both got in sales, right? And he came back to the West Coast. I moved to San Francisco. We started investing in real estate together, which is a whole different can of worms. And we had so many projects going on, and we were both trying to get better in sales that we didn't have the time to do this. So we were just listening to other podcasts. Specifically, we would listen a lot to Make It Happen Mondays by John Barros, and still have a ton of respect for him. And he's been on the show multiple times. And I was like, Nick, like there's a really good set of podcasts out there. But frankly, there are way too many podcasts where you listen to them for 3 hours and you don't even get a single tactic out of them. You don't even get one. You listen 3 hours, you get maybe one tactic if you're lucky.
Yep.
I was like, we're two guys who are young, we're with it, we're in the game, right? And we could run a 10 times better podcast than anyone else. And every time was like, Nick was like, I don't need these more distractions. Like, I know we could do it, right? But like, it's just another distraction. It's another project. We've gone through 700 different projects, right? But he agreed, right? Then COVID hits. I'm like, you fucker. Whoops, excuse me, whatever. Can't believe that one. I was like, dude, like no excuse now. Neither of us watch TV. I was like, we're buying mics and we're recording this thing. And
well, wait, there was an experience that we had before that made us think, oh, we actually could do this. Because you're right. You would throw me the lofty, we'll just do a podcast. And dude, I listened to a ton of podcasts. Like that's how we got into real estate investing, was we listened to the Bigger Pockets podcast. Mm-hmm. But we went on a ski trip right before COVID. And you were putting together a negotiation playbook for your team that you managed at the time at Carta. And you were putting together on the Word doc, and you were like, hey, come over, like, tell me everything you know about negotiation. And I just started rattling stuff off. And you're like furiously typing on the doc. And that was the outline for one of our first ever playbooks that we did on negotiation.
That's actually true.
And I think that for me made me realize, okay, like we actually can jam on this stuff. And I think I taught you some things in that session. And I know you taught me some stuff in that session. And so I saw it as here's a really cool opportunity for you and me to, because we always would share, hey, what cold call opener are you using? Like, what's working for you today? We were always exchanging best practices, but this was a way for us to formalize it. And then we also thought, well, shoot, we're just like learning from like reading stuff and like hunting and pecking around the internet. What would happen if we brought on folks who were far deeper in their sales career? And again, frankly, better salespeople than we were at the time, and just like ask them the questions that we had. It was free coaching and free mentoring. And like, if you listen to probably our first like 50 episodes, you and I rarely speak up because we're just like sitting there learning from our guests. And so that was the tipping point for me.
Bam. And then from there, recorded the first 5 or 10 or so. We DM'd directly, like every single person we knew, begging them to listen. And I remember our first episode got something like 500 downloads. And we were like pretty stoked at that.
We didn't just DM people. So the hardest part about getting a big following for a podcast is going from 0 listeners to your first like 500 listeners, right? It's easy now to stack listeners. We were like, you and I made a commitment to each other that we were each going to contact 200 people that we both knew. Mm-hmm. And the first 50 were easy, right? It was like college wrestling buddies. Yeah, we had a spreadsheet. We literally had a spreadsheet. The first ones are easy. It's like my buddies from high school, guys we wrestled with in college, family, friends. And then the next, like the last, like probably 70 or like, I don't know any more people. So I'm literally texting like ex-girlfriends being like, hey, I know we haven't talked in 8 years, but like I'm launching a podcast. Will you give it a follow? And like we did it, right? It was uncomfortable. It was weird, but the show ended up doing okay, I guess.
You did okay.
Yeah. Okay. We got Capture. Hi, I'm Kelly, a startup founder. I launched a SaaS marketplace for commerce. What's one tip you wish founders would do more of when starting founder-led sales?
Okay. I assume that's a pass over to me.
I just talked. I monologued about the show, so I'm trying to be polite.
Fair enough.
That's my new thing, trying to be polite.
That would be a new thing. So there, in the early days, when I was working at Pave, was like the 9th employee, and I think the major thing that there are 2 common things that I see founders struggle with, especially in that early founder-led sales phase. And one thing that I really admire our founder Matt for is his first startup actually failed that no one talks about. He ran it for like 6 months. And it was a startup called Parable. And it was a personal finance app. It was like Mint on steroids. And he like put all this work into like building this app, and then he tried to sell it, and like no one wanted to buy it. And so out of spite, he was like, I refuse to write a line of code until someone writes me a check. And so what he did is he sent out like 300 cold emails to CFOs about a problem space he was passionate about. He's like, I think stock options are really, really confusing. I think compensation is pretty broken. Here are like 3 or 4 problems that I think exist. We have our customer advisory board. Can I like talk to you and understand like what you think about these problems? And if it's helpful, like I'll buy a coffee, right? So he ends up having like 100 conversations in 2 weeks, and just does pure discovery with an open mind, and seriously looks for the most visceral problem related to compensation that he can find, right? And eventually he finds this company that started talking about how miserable their compensation cycles are. And there are 3 or 4 other CFOs who had said the exact same thing. And so he says, hold on. And so he literally like leaves for 12 hours, pulls an all-nighter, and mocks up like a Figma of what a comp cycle software would look like. He puts it in front of them. And he's like, if you pay me 20 grand, I'll build this for you. And they said, sure. And he was like, really? They paid it to him, and he coded it in a week. And so instead of leading with problem, he led with, or instead of leading with product, he led with problem. And oftentimes what I see founders do is they're so passionate about like all of the blood, sweat, and tears they've poured into their product. And this happens to us at 30 MPC too, that they end up like trying to shove the features into the market versus in the early phases, like salespeople can have the best and worst product sense in the world. The difference is, are you really, really, really good at listening to the intent of the problem and moving your product in that direction and letting your customers pull you into product market fit in the early days. That is critical. That's the first problem. The second problem is like some stuff around deal process that I won't get into now. Founders like typically struggle like driving timeline, asking people to buy, and getting to power. But that first bucket is like the make or break on like whether or not you find product market fit.
Nice. Solid.
Career advice.
Matt, if you didn't know, so Matt says he's aiming to transition to tech. He's got 11 years of sales experience in medical sales. It's hard to land an AE role without SaaS experience. What do you think about taking an SDR job? If you haven't heard it, Matt, we did an episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. It was a playbook called How to Land a Killer Sales Job. And we talked about like defining the companies that you want to work at, ways that you can prospect into those companies, like ways to nail the sales interview. And so the main thing that I would put in front of you is like, if you can break in and get an interview, which is something we talk about in that episode, you know that objection is going to come, right? Like you haven't sold software before. You haven't sold SaaS before. You can probably get ahead of that objection if you plan and know that it's coming. Like most objections, if you can preempt them, you'll be able to get around it. So my advice for you, go listen to that episode. It was like 30 minutes of you and me just sharing our very best stuff. You're going to get way more out of that than anything we give you in this live, I'd say.
I've got one or two things though, because so Nick was an SDR. I was not. So I've actually never been an SDR. Mm-hmm. I sold insurance in college and did like 200 cold calls. So that's like pseudo SDRing. Yeah. And like, that's where I learned how to cold call. And then I worked in finance and transitioned directly into an AE role. So you asked, should I accept an SDR job, even though I have 11 years of medical device, I assume, sales experience, right? And the answer is maybe, but first try to get an AE role. So there are two things that I would recommend you do to get an AE role. The first is you need to techify your resume, okay? And what I mean by that is I pulled up that insurance experience. I made it clear. I made it look like a tech resume. Talked about the number of dials, talked about percent to quota, talked about club, used tech terms, right? If you don't know those, talk to tech friends or make tech friends or ask tech people to show you their tech resumes. Make your resume feel like a tech resume so you know the talk, right? That's number one. Number two, figure out where you have an unfair advantage. So I had like my prospecting story where I could say like, I know my cold calling, you have your story around medical device sales, right? And you can talk about how you're going to translate medical device sales into prospecting and tech, right? And that's why you should be able to supersede the SDR role, right? The other thing that helped me a lot is, again, I was in finance. I was exclusively looking at fintech companies, right? So if you can find a tech company that like is adjacent to the medical device space, you have an unfair advantage, right? And I'm not saying you have to stay there forever, but you got to stay there for a year. You just got to like land your first AE gig where you have an unfair advantage. So I ended up getting hired on board with Carta. And the last thing that I'll say is what Nick mentioned is prospect your way in. Like your resume isn't going to do it. So you need to figure out the 10 companies where you have an unfair advantage, right? Go directly connect with every single AE on those teams and be like, hey, I'm really passionate about what you guys are doing. I want to know what it's like to be on that team. Can I buy you a coffee, a Zoom coffee or something like that? Take 10 conversations with those 10 companies and have them refer you in the back end. And that is the only way that you're going to get the AE role. And if that doesn't work, then you can go try to be an SDR. But I would go for the closing role first and know that your job is going to be harder than mine, because I did this back in like 2018, give or take, which was a bull market. And there are a lot of salespeople that are being let go right now, unfortunately. So there is a lot of talent on the market. But I hope that's helpful.
Cold call the VP of sales. Armand, what's your name? Matt. Armand, my name's Matt. I know I'm calling you totally out of the blue. I'm interested in being a salesperson on your team, and I've got 3 reasons why I think I'm a really good fit. Do you mind if I share those 3 reasons, and then you can tell me whether or not we should have a conversation? One of those 3 reasons should be, hey, I had the guts to pick up the phone and cold call you, and I bet you wish your team did that. So, like, that's what I would do if I were trying to get a sales job today.
You only got to get one job. Keep that in mind. You have to get one job, and a lot of people try to send out 100 resumes. Like, you're only allowed to accept one of those jobs. So you're better off inverting your funnel and picking the 10 companies that would be a dream to work for instead of blasting 100 and not putting any thought into it, especially in your position.
Yeah. Cordell, it's called Nick and Armand teach you how to land a killer sales job.
Yeah. Every 10 episodes, we do what's called a playbook. episode if you didn't know, and just go through the playbook. So every 10 episodes, it'll be called like playbook 1, playbook 2, playbook 3. I think it was like playbook 3, I want to say, or something like that. But just go every 10 episodes and you'll find it. Cool. Anything else? Last question?
Last question. Last call for question.
Someone throw some last questions in the chat. We don't have a hard stop. Give us a good one. Make Nick tell an embarrassing story.
Oh. How do you deal with self-doubt when starting a new business?
That's a fun one.
I think we deal with that almost every single day. I
got one for you.
Let's hear it.
So I have a good friend of mine. So I've been in yoga teacher training, of all things. And there's this gal who's really, really smart in the class. And she's like a really good artist. Okay. And she quit her job in marketing because the job just got so freaking miserable. Right. And her goal was to figure out a way to like monetize her artistry skills. Right. But the life of an artist is a really painful way to monetize. Like you might not see the results of that until 5-10 years down the road. So imagine the self-doubt that comes from something like that, right? And so she was like, maybe I can like get into the tattooing space, right? And like do an apprenticeship where I can like use my art skills to go there. I was like, that's good, right? But that's still like, you got to find an apprenticeship and all this stuff. And so the major push that I had for her was, you're extremely talented. What is the smallest step you can take forward that is a zero regret move, right? And how can you focus on 100% of what you can control in taking as many of those small steps forward as possible, as opposed to if someone discovers your art, right? Mm-hmm. So the first thing that we did is we were like, okay, we're going to make a commitment. Every single day, she likes drawing food. Every single day for the next month, you're going to draw something. You're going to post it on Instagram. I don't care how many likes you get, right? You're going to pick your favorite restaurant and go eat there, take a picture of the food, draw the food, tag the restaurant, right? And maybe you follow 10 people, right? And on day 1, the first post got like 5 likes. Day 2, 10 likes. Day 3, 12 likes. Day 4, 5 likes again, right? All the ups and downs. But inevitably what happened is it's the 11th day, right? 30, 40, 50 likes. Now restaurants are resharing. Today alone, 3 DMs. Hey, do you sell prints? Can I buy them?
Wow.
Right? And so find the smallest step you can take forward. For us, it was, even if no one listens, the 2 things we can control, we can buy mics and find a really good guest and record an episode. Like we can do that. Like that is our superpower. Let's build a business around our superpower. Mm-hmm. And then number 2, we're sales guys. So let's go de-risk the audience by DMing 200 people each to listen, right? We can control the consistency of the content and we can control the distribution of the content. And that is cheap. And the number one thing that will solve self-doubt is validation in market. So optimize speed to market and take the smallest step you can forward first as quickly as you can. And I promise you will feel better and you'll realize it's not that hard.
Phenomenal advice. Phenomenal advice. The only antidote to worry is action. That's one that I like. You want to answer Matt's last question?
Man, she's great. Nick's voice helped.
Somebody commented on one of our shorts and said he sounds like Ben Shapiro. And I got a bunch of upvotes, and now I lost sleep over that one, man.
That's funny.
Oh man, attainment's hard. Any market predictions? I don't have any market predict. I don't know. I don't really like making predictions because I'm only going to wake up and like it doesn't really affect what I do today. And I'm focused on today. I'm focused on waking up and giving today 100%, which sounds cheesy, but like, I don't know. Do you have any market predictions?
I don't have the Ben Shapiro of sales.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro, give us some stock investing advice. I also do not have predictions. What I can tell you is my prediction is that eventually it will come back. And like hundreds of years of economic history have shown that. The other thing that an old boss of mine told me is he's like, I really like economic downturns. I was like, well, that sounds really morbid. Why? He's like, it shows you who's real. And if you're hitting 100% of quota today, like in a bull market, you're going to hit 200%. And so this is like an opportunity for you to like sharpen your skills and figure out like how you can really get better, because bull markets are like, it's sort of like in COVID when like everyone was door dashing stuff every single day, and you'd be wearing this up top, but you'd have like basketball shorts down below or something like that, and you show up to work and like your pants don't fit anymore and stuff like that, and you're like used to wearing pajamas every day, and like you're like, oh, like I sort of lost my edge, right? Bull markets will do that to you. Before you could get away like selling a deal that didn't have any power in it. Like people were optimizing to buy in a bull market. People are optimizing to save right now. And so take this as an opportunity to have watertight fundamentals and train with the weight vest on right now. And I promise you the weight vest will come off. And if you underwrite your earnings on a 20-year time horizon, you will be thankful that this happened, because in 5 to 10 years, when the bull market comes, you're going to be outproducing everyone else. That's my take.
Seems like a good note to end it, man. That was wonderful.
Alrighty, folks. Well, thanks for tuning into AMA. We'll do this on in a couple of weeks. We actually have Jason Bay, who's going to come over and like sleep over at this content house that we have in LA. And so that's going to come around. We're going to do an AMA that's not just YouTube next time. It's going to be like a LinkedIn Live, so it'll be on all of our major platforms. And thank you, folks, for tuning in. If you like what you saw here, click sub, share this with other folks around. And we just launched the YouTube channel, and doing this stuff is a lot of fun. All right.
See y'all. Thanks, everybody.
Late. Still waiting. I can't figure out how to turn it off. All right, there. Peace.
See y'all.